Hey everyone. So there's this really popular chart analyst who's saying something pretty exciting right now. XRP is gearing up for what could be its final major move in this market cycle. And if they're right, a whole lot of XRP holders are about to become extremely wealthy. Now, get this. We literally just saw the highest quarterly close in XRP's entire history. I'm talking about an hour ago. Pretty incredible, right? Here's what makes this even more interesting. This is all happening while the US government is on the verge of shutting down. Now, I know about half of you watching are from outside the United States, and you might be thinking, why should I care about that? Well, here's the thing. The US has the largest capital market in the world. When something major happens there, it creates waves that spread across the entire global market. No pun intended with the Ripple reference. So, yeah. This actually matters to all of us, no matter where you're watching from. So we've got this potential government shutdown coming up. Plus, people are getting nervous about Bitcoin's chart patterns at this point in the cycle. I definitely want to talk about that. But I'm really going to focus on XRP today, because some fascinating things are happening. I mentioned this yesterday, but it's worth saying again. I follow several XRP chart analysts who have been historically accurate with their predictions. I'm talking about analysts who correctly called XRP's participation in this market cycle and predicted that massive surge we saw at the beginning of November last year. Remember that? Here's what's really interesting. Every single one of these analysts that I follow firmly believes XRP is going to enter an absolutely mind-blowing phase of price discovery before this cycle tops out. They're all saying the same thing. And honestly, history backs this up. Based on everything we've seen in previous cycles, this is actually the most probable outcome. It's what the data tells us to expect.
So let's talk numbers. We just closed out the day, which means we also closed September and wrapped up the third quarter of 2025. This happened about an hour and 20 minutes ago at 7 p.m. Central Time. Where are we sitting right now? Actually, things are looking pretty solid, all things considered. Think about all the panic you've been seeing on social media this past week. Everyone freaking out, right? Well, XRP is sitting at $2.84. Bitcoin is at $114,385. The sky hasn't fallen, my friends. Not even close. But you wouldn't know that from some of these headlines. Check this out from CoinDesk. Bitcoin steady, but Bitfinex warns of downside risks as US government shutdown looms. Look, I get it. There have been times in history when US government shutdowns have affected markets. I'm not going to deny that. But here's what I need you to understand. It really doesn't matter in the long run. XRP community member Frecky pointed out something really interesting. There have actually been 21 federal government shutdowns in US history since the modern budget process started back in 1976. Now, I'm no math genius, but that works out to roughly one shutdown every 2 years. That's a lot. This happens all the time, folks. And you know what? Numbers still go up. Markets still grow. Even if we see some short-term price movement because of this shutdown drama, it's just noise in the bigger picture. Let me explain why. You know what keeps running even when the government shuts down? All the essential services. I'm talking about military operations, law enforcement, air traffic control, social security payments, Medicare, Medicaid, and all the other critical functions that keep the country running. The shutdown isn't actually a shutdown. Life goes on. Markets adapt, and crypto keeps moving forward. All these essential services keep running during a shutdown. Agencies keep the staff they need to protect life, property, and national security. Everything important stays operational. Yes, it's true that non-essential services pause, but what does that actually mean in practice? Well, some federal workers get temporarily furloughed, and it always ends up being temporary. Some public services slow down or stop for a bit.
But realistically, what are we talking about here? Things like some national parks closing, passport processing gets delayed, regulatory reviews slow down a bit, that kind of stuff. It's really not the end of the world. If anyone's trying to sell you the narrative that this government shutdown is going to stop the crypto bull run in its tracks, the answer is a hard no. Absolutely not happening. I don't buy that for a second. It's honestly kind of silly. Now, does that mean markets won't react at all? Of course they might. I already acknowledge that can happen. But here's my point. Even if we do see some reaction, it's going to be short term. In the bigger picture, it just doesn't matter. Now check this out. Talk about sitting pretty. This is a post from Ryan Dietrich, the chief market strategist at Carson Group. He shared some really interesting data. Despite all the drama, the S&P 500 was actually up a little bit today. Even the Russell 2000 small cap stocks were up. Right now, the S&P 500 is up 13.7% through the end of September. Why is that a big deal? Because history shows us something really powerful. When stocks are up more than 10% heading into the fourth quarter, the last 3 months of the year are almost always positive. The data is right there on your screen. October can be a bit choppy, sure, but check this out. In 14 out of the last 15 times we've seen this exact setup, the S&P has finished the year higher. That's some serious momentum. And here's why this matters for XRP. Risk assets move together. When the stock market is strong, it fuels confidence across the entire crypto market. So if history repeats itself, which it tends to do, we could absolutely be looking at not just a solid fourth quarter for stocks, but also a strong tailwind for XRP and the broader crypto market. The stage is set for what could be a very bullish close to the year. Think about it. If stocks are going higher, crypto is coming along for the ride. They move in tandem because they're both risk-on assets. That's just how it works. When there's appetite for risk in the markets, everything goes up together. The difference, crypto substantially outperforms stocks over the long haul. Why? There's way less money in crypto. It doesn't take nearly as much capital flowing in to see a crypto asset double, triple, or even quadruple in value. That's exactly why this matters so much. And on top of all this, global liquidity has been rising. Look, I'm not claiming to have a crystal ball. I don't know for sure what's going to happen. Nobody does. But it doesn't take a genius to figure out what's most probable here. What's the most likely scenario? A climb heading into the end of the year? It's pretty obvious when you look at the data. Oh, and this was shared by Charting Guy at 7:09 p.m. That's just 9 minutes after the quarterly close. He highlighted something important about Bitcoin. He said, September 2025 monthly close? Pretty decent for seasonal weakness. Here's the thing, Bitcoin historically tends to struggle in September, but this September it's actually up. I shared some data recently, maybe a day or two ago, that showed something really interesting. In years where Bitcoin is actually positive in September, you typically see a very strong fourth quarter. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Bitcoin kind of stalling out lately. The XRP community has been buzzing with discussions about whether Bitcoin might have already topped for this cycle. So I want to share some perspective from an on-chain analytics firm called Swissblock. These guys do absolutely fantastic work. Fun fact, the same people who created Glassnode are the ones running Swissblock. After we go through this Bitcoin analysis, I'm going to spend pretty much the rest of this video focusing exclusively on XRP because we need to talk about that historic quarterly close. I want to explain why it's such a big deal, but first let me walk you through this Bitcoin stuff in order. The macro perspective really matters here. You need to understand the full context to see why all of this is so important for XRP. It's not enough to just look at an individual metric or the XRP chart by itself in a vacuum and go, oh, cool. I mean, sure, you should definitely look at those things. But when you factor in everything else happening on a macro scale, it becomes crystal clear that XRP is incredibly well positioned right now. In fact, XRP is positioned better than it's ever been in its entire history. I'm talking about fundamentals, but also way more than that. When you look at what's happening in the markets right now and consider the historical precedent, it's obvious. That thing is going to move. It's not done. Not even close. So here's what Swissblock had to say. They wrote, Bitcoin is in the process of finding a bottom. The key to watch are aggregated impulse signals. When it recovers back to zero, it has historically marked the finalization of a bottom and the start of upside continuation. This is really important. Swissblock, a respected on-chain analytics firm, believes Bitcoin has not peaked for this cycle. Let that sink in. They explain it like this. Markets move in cycles of stress and recovery. When stress peaks, short-term traders are forced to sell at a loss. Capitulation stress often marks the end of downside phases, setting the stage for recovery. Here's the key moment. Right at that exact point, the impulse signal collapses to zero. That's when panic exhausts itself and new buyers step in. Since early 2024, this reset has only happened 3 times. Each time marked a bottom in the short-term cycle. Now, when they say cycle bottom, they're not talking about the 4-year cycle. They mean short-term bottoms. I wish they'd use different terminology, but anyway. Each one of these bottoms was followed by a sustained recovery. And guess what? we're approaching that setup again. The risk-off signal tells the same story. From late August to early September, Bitcoin saw its sharpest wave of panic selling this entire cycle. That flush cleared out excess leverage and reset the market back to cost basis. This is textbook bottom-building behavior. Let me translate what all this means. This is completely normal market behavior. There's historical precedent for exactly what we're seeing. It absolutely does not mean this is the end of the cycle, even for Bitcoin. Now, I definitely don't believe it's the end for altcoins. I'd even argue this: if Bitcoin has already peaked this cycle, which I'm not convinced of yet, but if that turned out to be the case, it still wouldn't matter for XRP. Think about it. There's no reason to believe that profits wouldn't get pulled from Bitcoin and cycled into coins like XRP that haven't had their major run yet. I don't think this is going to be the first time in crypto history we don't have a full-blown alt season. I haven't seen a single logical reason articulated for why that would happen. History tends to rhyme with itself, folks. It just does. Here's another great point from Swissblock, and I love this because I've been talking about liquidity quite a bit lately. They wrote, "Now add liquidity and market participants." Liquidity remains strong. Unlike true bear markets, liquidity is not collapsing. They continue, "Network growth dips slightly while liquidity held up. The last time this setup occurred? October 2024, right before the big rally into November. Get this, Bitcoin is oversold versus its long-term mean, echoing past cycle bottoms. With liquidity steady and fundamentals intact, this looks like a bottoming reset, not a trend reversal." Everyone's entitled to their own opinion here, but a respected on-chain analytics firm like Swissblock is not convinced that Bitcoin has hit its peak for this cycle. I also want to mention Credible Crypto. I respect his perspective, and he has a very high accuracy rating. He's certainly not convinced the top is in for Bitcoin this cycle. He thinks we're going much higher. Now, he does think we might have to chop around a little bit in the short term, maybe some more sideways price action. A decision is going to be made soon, up or down. But either way, we're nowhere near invalidating what he sees in the charts. He thinks Bitcoin is likely to peak around $150,000. He acknowledges it could go quite a bit higher than that, and he still firmly believes XRP is going to peak somewhere between $20 to $30 this market cycle. Now check this out. This is from chart analyst Zoom. He says, XRP just had its highest quarterly close ever. You love to see it, folks. Highest quarterly close ever. XRP has absolutely never done this before. Nothing even close to this range. We've officially closed out the quarter with the highest quarterly close in XRP's entire history. The close was around $2.85. We're absolutely smashing through anything we saw in 2017 or 2018, back when we had what was, at the time, the most insane XRP run in history. This is above all of that. Even when XRP closed at its previous high, I think it was around $2.20 or something like that during that previous cycle. That's lower than where we close now. But here's what's even more interesting. Back then, when it hit those levels, it wasn't sustainable. It was the peak of a parabolic run. It couldn't hold. But now, we've been hanging around $3 plus or minus for how long? Most of the year. That's pretty wild when you think about it. This is a huge deal because long-term closes carry way more weight than intraday wicks. Institutions and serious traders look at quarterly and monthly closes to filter out all the noise. A new all-time high close like this, it tells us that XRP's strength right now is sustained. This isn't just a flash spike like we've seen at certain points in history. This is sustained power. Effectively, this is the new normal. Anywhere around $3 plus or minus. That is absolutely incredible. I've been here since 2017, and I've never sold a single XRP in my entire life. For most of the time I've been holding, the price has been around 30 cents or so. So you can imagine how I'm feeling right now. I could not be more excited. And it's not just because of the current price, because honestly, this isn't high enough for me to sell. I refuse to sell at this price. I think it's going way, way higher. But just knowing what this signals, the strength it represents, it's awesome. This also means something really important. The market has absorbed all that heavy resistance that's been capping XRP for more than 7 years. That zone has effectively turned into support now. Psychologically, this changes the entire narrative. We're going from XRP can't hold its highs to XRP is entering sustained new territory. In the context of crypto market cycles, that's exactly the kind of confirmation that comes before much bigger moves. And I mean much, much bigger moves. XRP isn't showing signs of a blow-off top. Not at all. It's showing signs of entering a strong mid-cycle phase. Frankly, it shows that there's much, much more room to run before we reach the peak of this market cycle. Sure, eventually the cycle is going to peak, and nobody's going to want to believe it when we get there. But that's not today, folks. We're going way, way higher from here. Here's another post from chart analyst Zoom. He says, historically speaking, XRP has had its biggest gains in Q4. Now, wouldn't that be interesting? I just showed you that post from Ryan Dietrich about how the S&P 500 historically performs really well in Q4 with this particular setup. And I just explained how there's this strong correlation between risk-on assets, even across different asset classes like stocks and crypto. That's a great setup. And historically, Q4 is the best quarter for XRP anyway. Look at this data. Look at how much it's up in those Q4 periods. He's absolutely correct. I think we're most likely setting up for something pretty astronomical in the fourth quarter. I really wouldn't be surprised. Now, nobody can predict timing with certainty, so I'm not pretending to know for sure. I'm just saying I won't be surprised at all if by the time this quarter is done, we look back and go, whoa, that was one hell of a ride. Then we have this post from chart analyst Crypto Wizard. He says XRP's time soon. It is identical to 2017. Don't fade it. He continues, XRP is mirroring the 2017 bull run. It's getting ready for its final parabolic move into price discovery. It's a question of when, not if. The key is $3.65. Above $4.50 comes. You can see what he's highlighting in this chart. I mean, this is what I've been talking about literally for years because it's just so obvious when you look at the pattern. It happened last cycle, even though we didn't hit a new all-time high. It still played out the same way last market cycle and the cycle before that. You get one giant move up, then you consolidate for about half a year. In this case, it's been a little bit longer so far, but then you get the next major move up. He's highlighting what happened in 2017 and early 2018. I understand why he's focusing on that period because that's when we had the more exciting parabolic moves. But structurally, it was the exact same pattern last market cycle too. We had a move at the beginning of November 2020. XRP went from something like 20-something cents up to just over 80 cents. Then it consolidated for half a year. And despite the SEC lawsuit that came about a month after that move, it still consolidated for half a year. Then around mid-April, XRP peaked at $2 for that market cycle. And remember, it still hit $2 while under attack by the SEC. I still find that pretty impressive, honestly. But the same pattern happened there. And I'm just pointing out, like Crypto Wizard is highlighting here, it looks like the same type of pattern is playing out right now. Now, does that mean it's going to happen down to the exact same second, minute, day, or week? Of course not. But don't be surprised when we get that face-melting rally one day. And probably sooner rather than later. That won't surprise me in the least. Folks, I could not have higher conviction that the best is still ahead of us, including for this market cycle, as we haven't peaked yet. And even if Bitcoin has peaked, which again, it's possible, but I'm not convinced of that yet. But even if it has, in the end, it's not going to matter. Because I don't know about you, but I'm counting on getting my life-changing wealth not so much from Bitcoin, even though it is one of my larger individual positions. The vast majority of my crypto wealth is in altcoins, including XRP. I want those to run, and I genuinely believe that's what's coming next. And here's the thing about alt season. It all runs at basically the same time. That's what makes it so powerful. That alt season is still ahead of us. So it's incredible to see this macro environment lining up perfectly and then see that XRP is behaving exactly the way we'd hope. The highest quarterly close in the history of XRP. And it's been around for over 13 years now. You absolutely love to see it. This has been an exciting update on the markets and XRP. The data is looking strong. The patterns are aligning. And we're positioned incredibly well heading into the fourth quarter. Stay patient, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.